for the president, no doubt. Any word from the administration so far?
No reaction yet from the administration, Craig, but there is no doubt this is a legal and a huge political victory for President Trump, who's been fighting for the travel ban ever since he first took office. He's argued it's a matter of national security and protecting the U.S. from Islamic militants. Opponents, of course, have said it's racist because the ban targets mostly Muslim-majority countries. Now, it comes after candidate Trump called for a complete and total shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. Once in office, he softened that language, a big win for the president ahead of the all-important midterm elections, Craig.
Kristen Welker, thank you. More right now on NBCNews.com, more all day on MSNBC, and of course, a full wrap-up tonight on Nightly News with Lester Holt. We'll return you now, most of you now, to more of Today. I'm Craig Melvin in New York. This has been an NBC News Special Report.
Some of our folks here on set to talk about the political piece of it. Tom, please don't go anywhere, because this was one of the most controversial decisions that this president made. It was one of his first policies, and I believe Pete Williams is back for us now live outside the Supreme Court. Pete, we were just discussing the political implications here. You talked about the practical implications, meaning that for many of these people trying to come into the country from these other locations, as we've been showing, nothing really changes, but it is all but certain that the Department of Justice is going to be coming out any moment, I am sure, with a statement touting this victory for them.
Well, if not them, then the White House. So there were two. This policy was challenged on two grounds. First of all, the challenger said the president had no legal authority to do this because they say the law says when you're going to block a whole class of people, they have to have something in common. And the challenger said the only thing these people have in common is nationality. But the Supreme Court, again, by the 5-4 vote, said no. The authority to impose this restriction is squarely within the president's power under federal immigration law. And I must say, Ellie, based on the oral argument when this case was argued a few months ago, it seemed pretty clear that that's the direction they were going to go in. The touchier question was whether the Supreme Court would, how they would react to the second line of attack, which was that this law was passed with religious animus, that it was directed against Muslims. And here they cited the president's campaign statements where he said, notably, Donald J. Trump wants to block all Muslims from coming to the U.S. They say that he kept up these statements even after he became president. But the Supreme Court said today that they don't buy that. If you look at the history of the law, it seems pretty clear that it was based on a need to establish national security and not based on religious animus. So this is the first big legal victory for President Trump, I think you could say anywhere, because he had such a beating on his first two versions of the travel ban in the lower courts. And of course, it's his first big victory on any policy question before the Supreme Court, a 5-4 ruling. Now we've got one more, at least I think, one more day here of activity at the Supreme Court, and there's still a big question hanging over this court, and that is whether there are going to be any retirements. The one that we most often think about is Justice Anthony Kennedy, not because he's the oldest justice, he's the second oldest at 81, he'll turn 82 next month, but because last year we know he thought about stepping down, and so we'll see whether he's going to do that again this time. But he was on the court to give this president a 5-4 victory, a very big one for President Trump, Hallie.
Pete Williams there outside the Supreme Court. Pete, thank you. You heard Pete reference some of the comments that the president made regarding what he called a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. Here's a look back at what the president has said about his travel ban.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. You have no choice. You know, this is a very dangerous period of time because, well, everybody's talking and dealing. A lot of bad people are thinking about, hey, let's go in right now.
Go to the Supreme Court, you think?
Good. And we'll see. Hopefully it doesn't have to. It's common sense. You know, some things are law, and I'm all in favor of that. And some things are common sense. This is common sense.
The president, of course, has argued that this is a matter of national security, as has his White House. Matt and Michael and John and Amber, who are here with me on set, I sat in those briefing rooms as administration officials, including Stephen Miller in some respects, made that argument as well. That the president had the right to be able to do this in order to keep Americans safe. As Pete explained, the challenger said, this is because they're Muslim, and that's why, and don't call it anything else. The Supreme Court has now come down and said, this is what it is.
Well, it is what it is, and that was always the weakest part of the case in challenging the president. Was the federal law is very clear. It gives the president a wide array of authority in this area with respect to immigration.
Yeah.
How he acts under that can tick some people off, but as the court affirmed, he's well within his rights to do it.
My colleague at the White House, Kristen Walker, is joining us now from the White House North Lawn. Kristen, I've been emailing administration officials trying to get some immediate reaction to this. I know you have as well. I don't believe that we have any kind of official statement at this point. But tell me when we might get the opportunity next to hear from President Trump. He's got some remarks later on today, right?
He's got an event at 11:30, Hallie, and then he has some closed-door events. Perhaps he'll open that up. He's going to be having lunch with lawmakers. He'll be talking about immigration. So certainly we'll be pushing for that. Bottom line, this is a massive political win for President Trump. As you have known, because you covered him on the campaign trail, he's been fighting for this as a candidate since he first took office. He's argued it's a matter of national security, protecting the U.S. from Islamic militants. Opponents have said, though, it's targeting Muslims because the ban essentially deals with Muslim-majority countries for the most part. It comes, of course, after candidate Trump, as you just replayed there, called for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. Once in the Oval Office, the president changed that language. He softened it to make it a travel ban, but we know that the Supreme Court looked at that language, ultimately determined it was irrelevant. But bottom line, it has been the most controversial proposal, or at least one of them, of the president's entire administration. It also comes as the president is increasingly engulfed in the political crisis that you and I have been covering now for days surrounding his hardline immigration policies, that zero tolerance policy that's prompted all of those family separations. He, of course, reversed the family separations, but continues to be mired in that controversy, Hallie.
Yeah.
This is really striking, and again, we're checking our phones, checking to make sure that we haven't gotten any reaction. We haven't gotten any yet, but as soon as we do, we'll bring it right to you.
And I know they'll be in front of the camera for us. Kristen, thank you. Pete Williams, by the way, is back at the Supreme Court, remaining in front of the camera, because, Pete, I understand you've been reading through the decision there, the papers in your hand. Tell me more about what you're learning as you look through this.
So a couple of points I think bear emphasis here. The first is that this ruling technically is a ruling on whether to uphold the injunction or the order blocking enforcement of this proclamation, this travel ban. And today the Supreme Court said no, applying the well-established standards for when courts uphold injunctions. So it strikes the injunction down. So as a technical matter, this lawsuit filed by Hawaii and the other Muslim individuals and groups is still alive in Hawaii. But having said that, the Supreme Court sets a very high bar for the challengers to succeed. So it's not totally dead, it's just kind of merely dead, I think is the best way to say it, this challenge to the travel ban.
Okay, what does that mean in practical terms, Pete? Is Hawaii going to continue, to your knowledge, this challenge? Yeah.
Well, without question, the challengers will continue, but the problem is they now face a very stiff headwind from this Supreme Court decision, in which the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, says the president has the authority to do this under the law, and we don't buy the claim that it was enacted with religious animus. Now, having said that, the lawsuit is still alive, but I think, and the judge may well continue to rule that this violates. He may not be swayed by the court's analysis here, but I think this challenge, for all intents and purposes, is a dead letter, even though it's going to continue in the lower courts. But I think that's my own guess is that's a footnote. It would be a shock if this gets back to the Supreme Court and they say, oh, well, thinking about this now the second time, what the heck, the travel ban is unconstitutional. So I don't think that's going to happen, but I just wanted to note that. Now, the second thing is, the court said, look, the president, not only this president, but any president, would have the power to impose this kind of restriction. So that deals with the statutory question. And as I said before, the other question was, did he do this with religious animus, religious prejudice, religious discrimination? And is that so serious that it infirms the resolution and the whole thing should be struck down? And the court says, look, we're aware of what the president said as a candidate. We're aware of what he said as president. But they said, we're reviewing a presidential directive, which, if you just look at the words, is neutral on its face in terms of whether or not it's discriminatory. We're addressing a matter within the core of executive responsibility, and so we must consider not only the statements of a particular president, but also the authority of the presidency itself. So in other words, they say, these statements made by the president don't outweigh the fact that he was well within his legal rights to do what he did, Hallie.
So in other words, Pete, I know one of the phrases that had been used to describe some of the arguments in this case were the president's tweets could be used against him. In this instance, the Supreme Court is ruling they were not.
Well, no, I guess the Supreme Court is saying we're aware of those tweets. They don't help him much, but the fact is they don't help the challengers enough. They don't undercut the fact that the enactment itself, the thing that was announced in September, version 3 of the travel ban, if you just look at the cold words on the page, is neutral. The president had the authority to do that. So those tweets, while they don't help a lot, don't hurt enough to make this unconstitutional, or at least to uphold this injunction that was issued by the judge in Hawaii.
Pete Williams there over at the Supreme Court. Over on Capitol Hill, by the way, at the Capitol, Paul Ryan is not reacting or responding to this just yet. He was just asked by reporters in that room about his opinion on the ruling. The House Speaker said, let me read it and let me get back to you. All of this obviously unfolding in just the last couple of minutes. Mitch McConnell, however, is reacting, tweeting a picture, his campaign team this is, showing a picture of Mitch McConnell shaking hands with Justice Gorsuch. Mitch McConnell obviously considering that one of his greatest accomplishments in his time leading the Senate. Matt, I want to get your reaction, but first let me bring in Alan Dershowitz. He's a Harvard Law School professor emeritus, the author of Trumped Up, somebody who's been on this program. Alan, you predicted this. You wrote a piece last year, I believe, last March, titled Why the Supreme Court Will Uphold Donald Trump's Travel Ban. You are not obviously surprised by this ruling, but explain where you think this goes next.
Well, the reason I predicted it is you can't have words on paper by a president that are unconstitutional as to one president, but would be constitutional as to another president. If President Obama issued the same order, you uphold it, but if President Trump does, you don't uphold it. I actually began to wonder if that would be the case when Justice Kennedy, in the case involving the baker who wouldn't provide a cake to gay couple, the Supreme Court, Justice Kennedy, actually looked at the religious motivation behind the decision of the Colorado authorities and actually did look at what was said by the Colorado authorities and used that to strike down in a very, very limited manner the decision of the Colorado authorities. So here you have Justice Kennedy in one case looking at religious motivations, looking at religious statements, and in another case saying it's insufficient. I suspect the reason is because in one case it was the actions of a president, and in the other case it was merely the actions of a Colorado authority.
Alan, are you surprised by the makeup? Justice John Roberts, Chief Justice, obviously delivering the opinion to the court. You had him joined by Kennedy, Thomas Alito, and by Justice Gorsuch as well.
No, I'm not. That's the predictable makeup. The Chief Justice likes to take cases like this. Not a surprise. Of course, if there are retirements, they will probably come from the more liberal or centrist wing. So I suspect the vacancy. As a liberal Democrat, obviously, I hope there is no vacancy. I'm hoping that Justice Kennedy and Justice Ginsburg and Justice Breyer, all of whom are now in or approaching 80s, will remain on the Supreme Court for a long time. But if there is a retirement, it will probably only strengthen the president's hands, as the appointment of Justice Gorsuch did.
Alan, stand by for a moment. I know Matt Miller is eager to jump into the conversation here. Matt?
Look, I think what the Supreme Court found is that the president and his team were basically able to construct a legal architecture to buttress what he wanted to do all the time. I think this would have been very different if it was travel ban 1.0, the one that they implemented after
travel
a few
ban
days,
3.0,
which was obviously motivated by animus. They hadn't consulted anyone in the cabinet. They hadn't really justified it well. In the interim, between then and September, they went around and put together, justifications from national security officials for this. But just because it was legally, just because the court has found it's legally justified, doesn't mean the administration has been telling the truth about this. And here's an important thing. Remember when they rushed this through and they said we have to put this blanket ban on these countries? It's because there's a national security emergency and we need time to develop what they called an extreme vetting program. And when the extreme vetting program is done, we won't need this travel ban anymore. It's been a year and a half.
But
where's the extreme vetting program?
But this is not entirely unusual. I mean, the Supreme Court ruled similarly in Obamacare, that the president had gone out there and told everybody that the individual mandate was not a tax, and then they went ahead and ruled that he could keep Obamacare, essentially, that he could keep the individual mandate, the underpinning of the financing of it, because in fact it was a tax. So I think what Professor Dershowitz was saying earlier kind of holds here, where he's saying, look, if the president of the United States is doing this, it's a little different, and you have to look at the policy. The only way that this policy was unconstitutional was the way they tried it the first time, which is to basically say we're going to do a blanket ban on all Muslims and have a religious test.
I think stepping back from the actual travel ban and going back to Mitch McConnell's photo of him shaking hands with Justice Gorsuch, this is a huge win for Trump at a very key time as he tries to help Republicans keep control of Congress, because he doesn't have a ton of legislative accomplishments to champion. But he can point to getting Justice Gorsuch on the court, upholding this extremely pivotal piece of his agenda, and say, look what I did and look what Congress did for the conservative cause.
But all the more reason to hold the House this fall is, and although it has nothing to do with Supreme Court nomination, it's the idea that Republicans, in place is a good thing for the Trump administration.
And putting in place judges, not just at the Supreme Court level, but at all levels that are amenable to the positions that conservatives are pushing. MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Green is joining the conversation now. And Lisa, speak to that point a bit. And I will tell you, by the way, yes, we have our Twitter alert set for any kind of reaction from President Trump, as I imagine that will likely be the first time that we hear from this president. Our teams at the White House are working for more on the administration reaction here officially, although clearly they are going to be thrilled by this. It's a win for them, Lisa. Talk a little bit about the political implications moving forward.
Yeah, so two thoughts. One is we were able to watch a lawful ban be reverse engineered. I think in most instances, a traditional administration would try to kind of water test something as politically sensitive as a travel ban. That isn't what happened here. We saw the reaction throughout the country to travel ban 1.0. Since then, I think it's fair to say the administration has regrouped and finally level tested a ban that would pass Supreme Court muster, the opposite of what you'd usually expect. Hallie, another political and legal point to make is we're not done with constitutional challenges to immigration policy. Remember DACA? That's the subject of several challenges in federal courts. Easily could imagine one or more of those cases going up to the Supreme Court, which is why the makeup of the court matters so much. We'll all be watching Retirement Watch, and why this decision, in a way, is so instructive if the issue is going to be what's the scope of presidential power when it comes to immigration decisions.
And I want to see if we have Pete Williams still with us over at the court, because it's my understanding that Justice Breyer, I believe, is reading the dissent from the bench now, which is something that we don't necessarily often see happen, Pete, and is an indication of just how strongly the justices who did not agree with Chief Justice Roberts feel about this.
Yes, although toward the end of the term, and pardon me, life goes on at the Supreme Court.
The lawn's got to get mowed, Pete. Look, I get it. Sure.
You've been at the White House when they do this, too. They're blowing the snow, nailing on the shingles, so these things happen. This time of the term, it's not unusual for a justice to read a dissent. As a matter of fact, this is the second dissent that Justice Breyer has read from the bench today, because I should say the court just decided a little earlier a case involving a California law that said that religiously affiliated organizations that provide pregnancy counseling do not have to post notices telling people that they can get basically a state-funded abortion. This was a law that was passed in California because members of the legislature thought that these clinics were giving out information that wasn't correct about the potential dangers of abortion. So they struck that law down, and Justice Breyer announced his dissent in that case, too. So he is dissenting. As a matter of fact, I think his dissent is slightly shorter in this travel ban case than it was in that case. So this time of the year, that's what we tend to get.
Maybe get a helmet, Pete, for your continued reporting out there this morning, because that mower seems to be getting fairly close. I want to bring in, I believe we have Lee Galern, the Deputy Director of the National Immigrants' Rights Project. Lee, if you're with us, you're over at the ACLU. I know you wanted a chance to read through the ruling to get a sense of what it says. Have you had a chance to do that? What is your reaction to the ruling on really this first major policy that was looked at by the Supreme Court in the Trump administration?
Right. We're still looking at it and evaluating it, what remains of the case, but it's obviously very bad. We're very disappointed. I think this opinion will go down historically as something that the country regrets. We believe that there was no question that this was a Muslim ban, and it was motivated by the desire to keep Muslims out of the country. And I think this is one of those situations where there's a real disconnect between what people know as a matter of common sense and what the court's holding. We don't believe this ban was necessary for security reasons, and I think that's why you saw so many security experts come out and file. We also think that the President of the United States sending a message that denigrates a particular religion is so dangerous in this country, and so we really regret that this came out this way.
What legal recourse might you have now, Lee?
Well, this does not end the case, so we will be able to go back to district court. We will evaluate the opinion. Justice Kennedy obviously wrote separately to say that the case is not over, depending on what evidence we can show below. But we're in the process of evaluating. Obviously, it just came down. No decisions have been made by us, and we will huddle about it. But right now, I think the country should be upset about an opinion that allows the President of the United States to denigrate a particular religion, especially when in other cases the court has been so careful not to let government policy be infected by religion.
What message do you believe this sends to the folks that you advocate for?
I think they are going to be heartbroken to see the highest court in this country say that it's fine for the president to make all these statements, whether before or after he took the oath of office, and it be upheld. I think they have been feeling, since this has happened, as outsiders, and this is only going to confirm for them that they are outsiders under this administration.
Now, the justices, the 5 justices, including Chief Justice Roberts, who ruled essentially for the Trump administration, said, listen, this is about national security. This is about keeping Americans safe, and that is something that the commander-in-chief is allowed to do and has the legal right to be able to do. You don't think that holds water?
No, we don't. I mean, as I mentioned, it's not just us saying that this was not necessary as a security measure, and that's why you haven't seen Congress or other administrations do something like this. The former national security expert said so. But I also think that it's very dangerous to say, well, immigration is just going to be outside the Constitution. The Supreme Court in past cases has said that even in the immigration area, even in the national security area, we need to adhere to the Constitution. Allowing us to discriminate on the basis of religion, we think, is antithetical to this country's values and the Constitution. I also would point out that Justice Kennedy said, even though we're not striking down the ban now, it doesn't mean that the president needs to go forward and do it. It's because judicial scrutiny is so much more deferential in this area. It's that much more important that political leaders take very seriously their obligation to remain within constitutional bounds.
Lee, thank you very much for your reaction to that. I want to let you know we are hearing now for the first time from President Trump, and yes, it is coming from his Twitter account, in all caps, writing, "Supreme Court upholds Trump travel ban. Wow! Exclamation point. We expect that we will likely hear more from the administration on this, but the president obviously, we're going to get you that tweet and show it up on screen in a second here. The president obviously very pleased with the ruling now coming in. We are also getting reaction, and pardon me for looking on my phone, from the Lieutenant Governor of Hawaii on today's, you can see the president's tweet there, by the way. wow, perhaps indicating surprise, perhaps indicating pleasure at this. Again, this is something that his administration had insisted for months, for over a year, that it had the right to do. The administration saying it had the right, based on national security, to be able to put this travel ban in place. There was even, remember that question of whether it was called a travel ban or not? And Sean Spicer, at the time the press secretary, saying, well, we're not calling it a travel ban, but then in the next breath calling it a travel ban, a question of what it even was.
It started as a Muslim ban. Then it became a travel ban. Then it wasn't a ban. The language on this has changed a lot, and I think it's with respect to the fear that it was going to be struck down. And, you know, you have not heard the president talk about this particular policy a lot. In an area of
recent months, you're
right,
saying, correct.
like in an area of discipline for him, he has not exacerbated his problem with having a lot of extra tweets out there. What's interesting, though, is Republican candidates are taking it a step further. Marsha Blackburn, running for Senate in Tennessee as a Republican, refers to it as an immigration ban.
Well, I think the other side, from the administration's point of view, talking about the origins of this, is less about the Muslim aspect now, because this ban, if you will, does not stop Muslims from Turkey or France or anywhere else in the world from coming here. It's just 7 or 8 countries that have been identified for national security purposes, as they would say, not by this administration, but by the previous administration, as a threat to national security, and therefore here's the appropriate check. They came out of the gate full-throated Muslim, realized, uh-oh, that includes a whole lot more people than we want. Let's dial it back. They finessed it, and here we are.
Yeah, look, they came up with a national security justification, and it was enough to pass legal muster. But let's be honest, that's not why they did it. We know why the president did it, because he told us. We know what he wanted to do because it was his initial ban, and it was not these countries. It was not North Korea and Venezuela. They dialed it back and came up with something that could pass, you know, legal muster, but it wasn't what he wanted to do. It's not what he called for in the campaign. And I want to say something just quickly about Mitch McConnell. I'm not surprised by the president's reaction.
Right.
But let's remember when Donald Trump first came up with this ban in the campaign, people in the Republican Party, leaders in the Republican Party said they were
This was December. This was December when this happened. I vividly remember because it was full coverage of this. Obviously.
You now see Mitch McConnell taking credit because he held this seat open. He stole it from President Obama, and now he has upheld the eventual successor of the president's Muslim ban. Congratulations to Mitch McConnell. That's apparently what you wanted.
We are going to get more reaction from the halls of Capitol Hill in just a moment, but I do want to talk about what we are hearing now from the Lieutenant Governor of Hawaii, who is now coming out and talking about this. Hawaii, of course, was the challenger in this, saying, Lieutenant Governor Chin, he says, I hurt today for Hawaii's families and others who have experienced discrimination and scapegoating due to President Trump's bullying remarks and others. Going on to say, though, I am fortified by the spirit of all those who came before us and who struggled for the American dream. The path to civil rights does not always come quickly, but I have faith in humanity and believe justice will eventually prevail. Again, that's Lieutenant Governor Chin of Hawaii. Michael, no?
What does that have to do with this ban? This isn't a civil rights case. This is a constitutional legal matter about the authority of the president to do what he did, and you can couch it in any way you want. Yeah, I agree with Matt.
The challenge has said for a while this is a civil rights issue.
I agree. For whom? It's not a civil rights issue for Muslims in Yemen. They're not American citizens. So this is not. I mean, again, the left have to be careful about how they couch these things, because if you take it to a space where nobody is, you're going to be there by yourself.
Let me get over to Cory Booker, who I believe is speaking in the hallways live now over in the Capitol.
We are not a nation of tyranny, because the president has tried multiple times, and his efforts have been diluted by the court system and by good-meaning people. He was not able to do what he wanted to do. This represents, in many ways, a retreat from his original position, which was banning people based upon religion. So he tried again and again and again, and he finally found something that they were able to tailor to get through, it seems, constitutional muster. I still disagree with the decision and the outcome, but I think we just cannot walk away from the fact of how this all started, which was a president that said that he wanted to ban Muslims from our country. And we're a nation that has had Muslims part of our nation for our entire history. Great scientists, great athletes, from Muhammad Ali to people who are some of our greatest heroes. And this is a person that wants to use something that our founders rejected, which is a religious test. And again, there's a moral assault, a moral vandalism going on, and I saw it yesterday on our border. And I'm going to do everything I can to fight for our values that are really, to me, some of the deepest things I love about my country.
This was a
Thank you.
five-court decision. Do you think that this decision would have still